than the Devil's mini golf course. So, but it appears that all we have are these. Anytime you see a change in tilt of that, it means there's been a big gap in time. It's sticking to my boots. Okay. One more mud puddle step on. Last time on Across the Mojave. So yeah, I'm going to be crossing the floor of Death Valley for the next 80 miles or something. And I have, I think, a little over 60 miles until my next water. I think my goal for tonight for camping is actually, if you look way up in Death Valley, there's a light-colored hill there, a little bit in front of the Panama Mountains. I think my goal is to be near the foot of that light-colored hill by tonight, which is about 15 miles distant. So the mine workings over here, and there's more, I think, on the other side of the hill, are the Sheep Creek mine. I believe the products mined here include gold, talc, and lithography stone that is stone used for printing. And yeah, so you can see there's some white stuff there just to the right of the gap there. I'm pretty sure that's probably the talc. Talc or talcum powder is used in a wide range of products like various beauty products. It used to be used in baby powder, although now you're not supposed to use talc-based baby powder because it can be carcinogenic. It's often used as a filler in plastics, all sorts of random applications. Now, talc is commonly produced when you have a magnesium-rich magma intruding into limestones, and in this case, I can see the rock on the right with the stripes in them. Those are probably limestones or dolostones, maybe with some shale mixed in with them with the darker layers. And the greenish-black rock on the left looks like the same gabbro we saw yesterday, and gabbro is very magnesium and iron-rich magma. And so I'm pretty sure probably the reason why there's talc here is because when that magma body intruded into the carbonates, there's basically a chemical reaction that goes on that commonly produces talc, which makes sense with that white layer being right there at the contact between where the gabbro on the left intruded as a body of hot magma into the limestones and other sedimentary rocks on the right. Anyway, I just need to keep heading down this way. I think I'm going to drop into this canyon at some point and then just head down the canyon in front of me, because the road is in the next canyon to the left, so this canyon here is okay. Neat little canyon, just cut into this older alluvium. Again, the reason why all this alluvium is uplifted, I think, is because there's a big thrust fault at the north edge of the Avawatz Moraine. Yeah, see, this is a beautiful example of something called an angular unconformity. So these looks like shales and limestones here, or maybe dolostones, have been tilted so they're almost vertical. And you know, those are probably Paleozoic in age. I don't know exactly how old, but probably, you know, 250 to 500 million years old, roughly speaking. Those have been tilted up on their side and then eroded down, and then these new, you know, pretty young fan sediments were deposited on the top. So anytime you see a change in tilt of that, it means there's been a big gap of time. In this case, probably a few 100 million years. Looks like we're coming around the corner here to where we're going to enter out into the open valley of death. Hopefully not mine. There's an old talc pile, it looks like, and maybe a little, some sort of mining relic. Here, I think there's a road up here that I need to cross. It's outside of the road. I need to stop and check my map. Oh, yes, I make noises like that basically every time. At least when it weighs this much. Got my sweater off, it's warming up, got sunscreen on. Okay. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost my sunglasses back at camp. I vaguely recall putting them on the ground next to my other stuff. They don't seem to be in my pack now, so I must have left them on the ground there. We can't not realize I left them there. Anyway, heading out into the valley. So the GPS says I'm coming to a little wilderness gap to cross this road. So the next couple hundred feet are out of the wilderness. but it's just a relatively narrow gap around this road. Well, and here's the road to the wilderness carve out that's heading up to the mine up there in the spring. The GPS says I'm back in the wilderness again. Now I just need to keep walking to the northwest for a few more miles till I hit the northern edge of the Avawatz Mountains wilderness and cross Saratoga Springs into Death Valley National Park and Death Valley Wilderness. All these little canyons are going to be very tiring. I have to avoid crossing wilderness, crossing roads that exit the wilderness, so I have to bend a couple times to stay in the wilderness area as much as possible. But it's a pretty straight walk, all in all, from here. Now that we're a little further from the Avawatz Mountains, you can see that the range front here is actually very straight, and there's a whole series of these little benches of alluvium lifted up. That's because the base of this mountain here actually has an active thrust fault that's pushing the mountains up over the alluvial fan. So some older alluvial fans are getting pushed up with that. And that thrust fault, if you follow it that way, actually ties into a bigger fault called the Garlock fault, which is a left lateral strike slip fault. So that means that it moves horizontally like the San Andreas fault, but it moves the opposite direction. So if you're standing on one side of it, the far side moves to the left. And so if you think of it this way, the left move to the left would be this way, but the Garlock fault actually doesn't run parallel to this fault. It runs more like that in our current coordinates. And so this block here, the Avawatz Mountain, is trying to push this way along the Garlock fault, but the Garlock fault actually ends around here. And so basically all the motion of the Garlock fault pushing that block this way is then pushing the Avawatz Mountains up over the thrust fault. Unfortunately, this has not been an easy alluvial fan to walk down. There's been a lot of this just good ankle twisting size rocks. Hopefully this is not a preview of tomorrow, which is a lot of walking alluvial fans that are not that far from the mountain front. Except then I'll be going crosswise, not the easy direction. At least right now I'm going straight down the alluvial fan, which makes it a little bit easier. Still making my way across this stony plain. Only now the wind has really picked up, so now I'm sort of staggering between the rocks, the weight, and the wind. Well, according to the GPS, I finally made it to the northern edge of the Avawatz Mountains wilderness. And so across the road, then I'll be entering Death Valley National Park. But right now, I need a little break, so I'm going to stop and have lunch here, I think. Okay, so I had a little break. The wind is, if anything, picked up over the course of my lunch. Oh, and here it is. Saratoga Springs Road. Haven't seen any cars on it since the 3 I saw pass as I was approaching maybe an hour ago or 45 minutes ago. Ugh. Big hill here to get over. And so now we're in Death Valley National Park. And we will be for the next 9 days, 8 nights, and 122 miles of hiking. So we're in Death Valley itself, sorry, Death Valley proper for only 80 miles, but Death Valley National Park for 122. Because the park has a lot of area besides what's just actually Death Valley, the valley. Oh, we're entering a fun new landscape type, the mesquite stabilized dune. These mesquite plants are not dead, they just, well, some of them are dead, but they're mostly just dormant because they're deciduous. They lose their leaves in the winter. And they break the wind and let sand pile up, and then the sand acts as a place where water can collect. We're getting closer here to the center of this plain, which hosts the Amargosa River, which is usually often dry. We're getting more salt-crushed playa-like features and old dead plants that are salt-weathered. Some kind of salt-tolerant grass here. Okay, so now we've come into the bed of the Amargosa River. Right now it looks to be dry, which I think is pretty common. It actually flows into Death Valley from Nevada, and when it does flow, it's too salty to drink. It's also very bitter, hence the name Amargosa. Actually, it's bed here is a little bit easier to walk on than the crunchy stuff I was walking on. I might just follow the river down. Who knows, maybe we'll find some salty water, pools of water. Originally I was thinking if I found some salty pools of water I could bathe in them, but might be too windy for that. I'm not sure I want to be all that salty. Walking on this Amargosa River is pretty good most of the time, but sometimes it's muddy. So hopefully I don't like just walk along and sink into a giant mud hole. Oh, there you go. There, oh, this gets very muddy as I approach this, but there is a nice fresh pool of water. Only it's not fresh, it's salty. Too salty to drink. I do worry a little bit, since I've lost my sunglasses, about getting snow blindness, or maybe I should say salt blindness, from the white glare off the salt here. But honestly, I have my left eye closed anyway from the wind, so I guess if I go snow blind in my right eye, I can always use my left eye. I think snow blindness is supposed to be temporary usually if it's mild, so I should be okay. Incidentally, it looks like it might be raining back there, or at least in the mountains. Again, I doubt if any rain is making it to the valley bottoms. But I probably should listen for water coming up behind me, because there aren't any big boulders here or a lot of debris. My guess is they don't get a lot of water coming flooding down here, so it should be something I could escape if necessary. Oh, this is muddy. Canyon seems to be narrow. I'm sort of worried it's going to turn into an actual river up here, and I'll have to leave its banks. Yeah, if you just saw this part, you'd think, oh wow, there's a river. That's a real river. You might even think it was flowing, but if you thought that, you'd be wrong. It was flowing to the left. The right is just the way the wind is blowing, so the ripples are going upstream. Okay, come back into an area with little channels of the Amargosa River. So how this one came to be on my left, I'm not quite sure. Very muddy in the bottom here. You can see we got more little ponds of salty water here. This shallow, salty groundwater. Little raft of salt crystals floating in it. We really must have trapped air or something to be floating, since otherwise salt crystals shouldn't float. The little line there looked like a fresh ice crystal. Probably got cold here. One of those nights, probably not last night. Maybe that night it was 27 degrees where I was camped. Of course, you came here and it had a layer of ice on top. You could actually eat the ice, even if the rest of the water were too salty to drink, because the ice would have been purified by freezing. Looks like a nice left across some of these little tributary thingies. It seems to just sort of re-arise at a... Well, I may have to get my feet a little muddy yet. This tributary crosses my path. Maybe it'll be easier to cross the other side and cross back later. Which way looks more muddy? I think I'm gonna go on the left just because it's probably better to stay to the left of all the streams, so I eventually need to be on the left. I don't want to get stuck on the wrong side of a big, wide, muddy river. Ooh, that's disgusting. I think you get like... Ugh. No, that wasn't too bad. A little bit of mud on the shoes. But yeah, I'm just going to try and stay on the left side of every river I see. And just stick on this side. So I don't have to cross through that muck more than necessary. Yeah, clouds behind me still look menacing. A little bit of a rainbow, actually. Hot damn. Well, lose our light. I'm also about to lose this GoPro battery, but that's okay. I'm gonna have to change it at some point. But I think we're gonna have a spectacular sunset if the sun holds. Looks like getting a little closer, but I've had my local sunset. Sun is starting getting down low to a pretty angle. Those stormy clouds at least aren't getting closer. It also doesn't look like the rain is hitting the ground. So you can see the streaks of rain coming down and then just disappearing. Like 2/3 of the way down. It's probably landing in the mountains, but not anywhere else. Sunlight's going fast. Should only have another 1.5 miles to my ideal camp, so I should make it not too long after dark. It's definitely a pretty time to be out here. Even if it is a little cold and windy. It's not that cold. I think if the wind weren't going, it wouldn't feel cold at all. But there's a lot of wind chills.
He says, the water's black and it tastes like blood. The skies are red and they smell like sulfur. And the nights are so long, they run together. And the trees are yellow and the earth is cracked. So save yourself. Save yourself.
Oh, we seem to have coalesced into a monster stream up here. I just hope I can get across without too much mud. I'm hoping it slenders to a little muddy part up here. I can sort of muddle my way through by stepping on these bushes. My feet are sinking in a way that I don't want to tarry any place too long. I think I can just jump this little salty stream here. Okay, so let's get muddy near the bank, but yeah, definitely a little bit of mud action there, but no biggie. Okay, let's get out of this muddy little canyon. Hopefully that was the last one, and I don't have another one on my left still. Last of the sun and the clouds. Yeah, it's a pretty place. Assuming you don't want to drink the water. You don't mind strong wind. This kind of bushy, hilly stuff is kind of slow going, unfortunately. It's not bad, but it's not... I'm not making 2 miles an hour, that's for sure. I'm probably making like 1 mile an hour at best. Which, given that I still have probably more than a mile to camp, is not so great. But we'll see. Okay, well, I'm not sure how much you're going to be able to see in the light, but I have made it into the canyon now. And the wind has died down, so I think that's good news for camping in here tonight. I'll just do a quick panorama in case you can't see anything. There's that rain cloud still back there. A little bit of breeze from time to time, but I think if I am where I think I am, I still need to walk a mile down to a camp where I would like to camp tonight. This might be my last check-in because it seems to be getting kind of dark for good video. Yeah, you can still see stuff on the screen, so that's good. But so I'll probably see you guys at camp in the morning. Okay, finally coming out of my camp here. I camped in this little, hopefully you can see this, hopefully there's enough light. I camped in this little alcove under this cliff, so it's nice and quiet. Almost no wind last night, despite the, at least initially, windy night outside. Dawn is starting to break. Out across the plain, still some clouds. Incidentally, I think this camp is probably my lowest elevation camp. We're still above sea level here. I forget the altitude. I think it's like maybe 90 meters above sea level still. But yeah, now it's time for me to leave the Amargosa River and turn left up this canyon here. And then head up the backside of the Confidence Hills and just continue up along the length of Death Valley. Today's not a super long day, actually. I have 17 miles to cover, but that was 2 miles more than yesterday, and yesterday I didn't get into camp till dark, so figure I might as well get an early start. Also good practice to get an early start because tomorrow I have a 30-mile day. Still heading up this canyon. So the mountains on the left here are the Owl's Head Mountains, and I'm just following the base of them today, basically all day long. So just walking straight ahead, keeping those mountains on my left. Basically as close to my left as possible, but there's no point in aiming any place further left than the point of the mountains out there. There's some cool clouds up there in the Black Mountains. Definitely new snow on the Panamints that wasn't there yesterday. Okay, so we're actually coming up to I think our only wilderness gap of the day. We need to cross Harry Wade Road up here. I've never actually driven on this road. Oh, we're starting to get some lights in the clouds. I think it might be a good show this morning. Red sky at morning, sailors take warning. Fortunately, I'm not a sailor. That's not that red yet. Actually, there is snow up in the Black Mountains on the right too. needless to say, I did not get any precipitation down in the valley where I was, so just up in the mountains. These cool sky glow on the top of the Avawatz Mountains. It's, yeah, actually that is sunlight hitting the ground over there. I think the sun has officially risen. And it's starting to think about peeking out through the clouds. Sunlight in the hills behind me and a vague shadow. Oh, that's a real shadow. I'm going to count that as sunshine. In fact, I might go ahead and take off the sweater, put on some sunscreen. It's at least hiking, it's getting warm quickly, although now the wind is coming up. Yep, that's the canyon all right. That far wall looks pretty tricky actually. Hopefully that cliff isn't farther than... Big burrow system. I was focusing on the cliff, I didn't notice all the holes here. They fell in far enough back there. Like fell in below the knee, I think, back there. Yeah, so you see how far that down goes. They fell in down to the knee on basically both legs, and that made me fall forwards. Which I managed to pull my legs out and catch myself, but then of course I fell in again. Ah! Okay, that was just me not paying attention. Okay. Oh yeah, easy peasy. I'm thinking I even need to crawl on all fours. If I can get a foothold here, which I'm not sure I can. I actually decided I do need my hands because this sand is too slippery here. Make a little toe hold there. Okay, there we go. The hills on our right are called the Confidence Hills, and if you look at them, they sort of have this odd look. They have this sort of Badlands look to them. What they actually are is just alluvium that's been lifted up. So they're the same white colored alluvium where you've been walking across, more or less, and not much older, and they've been lifted up very recently because they lie along the Death Valley Fault. Now, as for what the Death Valley Fault is, well, I'll just back up. Here we are in California. Most people, or a lot of people, have heard of the San Andreas Fault, which is a big strike slip fault that marks the boundary between the North American plate and the Pacific plate. Now, the Pacific plate is moving to the north, more or less, relative to the, or maybe let's say to the northwest relative to the North American plate, as that means it's moving to the right relative to us. So we call that a right lateral fault. But it turns out that a significant amount of the slip between these two plates is not actually on the San Andreas Fault. There are a bunch of other parallel faults that take up part of that slip. The Death Valley Fault here, which goes parallel to these hills, actually has something like 10% of the slip of the San Andreas Fault, if I remember my numbers correctly. So it's a pretty active strike slip fault. It's also right lateral. So right lateral just means the opposite side of the mountain, so those mountains in the distance are moving to the right relative to us. In this case, I think it's a few millimeters per year. I want to say 2 or 3 millimeters per year. And anytime you have a strike slip fault like the San Andreas, or in this case the Death Valley Fault, basically the two sides are trying to slip past one another. And if the two sides aren't perfectly parallel, there'll be places where the two sides either bump together or pull apart. And so this is a little spot where they're bumping together. It's what we'd call a compressional bend. So we get a little bit of compression here, and it basically squeezes up the sediments in between the sides of the fault. Typically a fault like this, instead of having just one nice vertical fault plane, we'll have a bunch of sort of parallel faults all together. And the stuff squeezes up in between those faults. And the cross-section looks kind of like a flower. So sometimes they're called flower structures. In this case, the flower is being pushed upwards, so it's called a positive flower structure. Now, when we get up to Death Valley proper, one of the reasons Death Valley is so deep is because it's actually on a releasing bend of the Death Valley Fault. So a releasing bend is the opposite of a compressional bend. It's where the fault angle is actually oriented such that it's pulling apart as the fault slips and making the valley deeper. We're finally coming up to this corner of the mountain up here. Okay, there we go. We got some bedrock. Nice granite. I don't know what age of granite this is. It's probably Cretaceous by the way it looks, but who knows. Well, we've come to the top of this ridge here. I think this is actually our high point of our day at a relatively paltry 170 meters. Our camp tonight will be, of course, even lower, at basically just above sea level. You can start to see the white flat part of Death Valley up ahead, getting closer to the famous part that's below sea level and near Badwater Basin. So Confidence Hills in the foreground, Black Mountains in the background with still a little bit of snow clinging on. Actually, you can start to see a little bit where the Death Valley Fault goes here. So you can see there's the white rocks in the back, and then there's sort of a little cleft in the ground, and then there's this dark alluvial fan in the front. And then you can see that same cleft continues that way between the dark on the left and light on the right. So that cleft is where the Death Valley Fault goes. The rocks on the far side, if there were an earthquake on it right now, would move to the right. And we would move, we would move the other way. We'd move north. Actually, it'd be really cool if there were an earthquake on it right now. We'd probably move a few meters. Usually these faults move, you know, like 5 meters is a pretty common distance to move, that's like 15, 16 feet. That's pretty significant. It might knock me over, but otherwise I'd be unhurt. Okay, well, I had a little lunch break. I've now come up over a hill too, just after my lunch. And you can see there's a dark hill there. I think that's now Shoreline Butte. You have to go around the left side of that mountain, which is about 4 miles from here. And then from there, just a mile downhill to camp. So I've got 5 miles left to go, so I'm making good time. I just hope the rain and snow in those mountains doesn't come and get me. Or for that matter, the rain coming out of that cloud. Although if you look at that rain closely off on the right, you can see it looks like there's rain falling, and then it sort of disappears midair. So there's a random thing just walking along the desert, and not something you expect to find. Voluntary radio sound. Okay, so I'm finally approaching the corner of the backside of Shoreline Butte here, where we're going to start heading downhill again. This is the last pass of the day, there with the Panamints in the background. And basically I'm going to walk downhill until I get to sea level. If you look at the Death Valley rules and regulations, you're not allowed to camp on the valley floor of Death Valley. And based on the map they publish, it's pretty clear that that means specifically that you cannot camp below sea level on the floor of Death Valley. So I'm going to camp at sort of the last spot that's above sea level based off of I'm actually not going to trust the altitude of my GPS, because GPS is really better at horizontal position than altitude. But I will use the horizontal position in the USGS topo map to pick a spot that's at least a few meters above sea level. As I look out across Death Valley here, I can see what look like bodies of water on the surface. Now the question is, are those real bodies of water, or are those just mirages developed on maybe flatter patches of the ground that were recently in the sunshine? I don't know. The fact that the sun isn't shining on them makes me worry a little bit that they are water, which may cause problems for my walking across the bottom of the valley tomorrow. But I guess we'll just have to see. Okay, well, it's still 3:45, so I got here early. But according to GPS, I'm now just above sea level. So if somehow you were to connect the canal to Death Valley, to the ocean, it would fill up to, and I'd be right at the beach here. It'd be nice. It's actually still very nice. Nice, beautiful view of the Panamint Range here. Some storms, etc. So anyway, I'll set up my camp here. It's not very well sheltered, but unfortunately I don't need any wood to make a campfire since those aren't allowed here anyway. So yeah, so the plan for tomorrow, which is that you can't camp on the floor of Death Valley. So I basically need to get all the way across in one day. The problem is the middle of the valley has roads on both sides. So if you really want to minimize the number of times you leave the wilderness, you need to get in the middle between the two roads, basically walk the full length of that section of wilderness, and then leave at the other end. You know, the plan for tomorrow is to get up like when the moon gets up, like in the wee hours of the morning, and start walking. Okay, well, you're not gonna be able to see anything because it's totally dark, but it's about 2:40 and I'm leaving my campsite. It's all packed up already. And I'm starting walking. You know, most days I'm walking by the GPS anyway, so. Although the moon is up now, which you probably, you can see a little tiny dot of light there, I guess. It's a bit of a waning crescent now. I don't know, I guess it's a half moon. So its light is not quite as much as when it was full, but I can kind of see where I'm going without a light. So my total mileage today is going to be 30.5 miles. And a little over 30 of those will be below sea level. Or to use a little older system of measurement, 10 leagues below sea level. Because a league is, well, often defined as 3 miles. Although the old definition of a league was the distance you could walk in an hour. By that definition, I think it's going to be more like a 14 league journey, but I guess we'll see. I finally reached the start of my track. So for the next 27 miles across the floor of Death Valley, I'm going to be attempting to walk a straight line. And I'm going to go ahead and use the GPS and do this proper straight line mission style. So I felt like I was making really good progress on my line. I was like looking forward to seeing how great my Burdell score was going to be. And then I hit the Amargosa River. It's like 10 meters across and it's Moonlight, so I can't tell how deep it is, but it's probably not that deep, honestly. Most of the places it's been just a few inches deep. But with I went and tested the banks a little bit, and there's some pretty deep mud there, so it's not actually the water depth I'm worried about so much as the mud depth. And so I'm like, okay, there's no way I can cross that. So I just diverted. I haven't measured it, but it probably is a couple hundred meters off course at least. I think my straight line mission is now a fail. So I've given up and just started heading in generally the right direction. You know, if I were being really hardcore about the straight line, I'm sure I could have crossed the river there. Probably the mud wasn't so deep that like it would trap me forever and I would die. But you know, what my concern was that I'd get mud all over my boots, salt water would go inside my boots, and then with 25 miles left to hike today, I would get blisters. I guess if I were really hardcore serious about the straight line mission, I would have taken off my boots and waded across it barefoot. I think I'm gonna have trouble enough getting to my supply point by dark anyway, without repeatedly taking off my boots to cross a muddy river. So here's the Amargosa River up ahead. It's become apparent that it's decided to make a hard meander to the left across my path, and I attempted to just cut off this meander if I can cross it here without getting too muddy. Yeah, you can see the river here, probably at least reflected in the dawn light there. Okay, one more mud puddle step on. Sorry, what I thought would be a nice solid bank was actually very muddy. In this dim light, you can see the salt crust here looks a lot like snow, or dirty snow. It sounds like it too. But nope, just salt. Temperature's not that far off. It's not, I think it's a little bit above freezing though. Crossing a little tiny slough that presumably is one of the network of channels of the Amargosa River here. Ah, that's way deeper than I thought, way deeper than I thought. Okay, I saw a little pond there, so I knew there might be mud. But the way it's crusted over, I thought, oh, that's not going to be a problem at all. I've given up all pretense of this being a straight line mission at this point. This is a getting across the valley 30 miles in the day mission. Okay, looks like we're starting to get sun raising the top of the Panic Range there. Still heading onwards. The sun is covering most of the Panic Range now. Hasn't quite gotten to us. One thing I like to point out here, well, the sun isn't directly backlighting it as much. This big ridge in front of us is Mormon Point. Or I guess Mormon Point is technically the point of the ridge, but the whole ridge, you notice, is very smooth and even. It looks almost like the back of a turtle. In fact, this is a geologic structure called a turtleback. This ridge, the next one, and even the one after that, it's a little harder to see, all have these sort of smooth tapering ridges that are domed over. You know, it's like you took a piece of paper, folded in half, and then goes down that way. And what these surfaces represent is basically an old fault surface that's been lifted up. But these faults are what we call normal faults. So the material on top is sliding down the turtle's back as the stuff below, the footwall, is rising upwards. And so in this case, the arch of the turtle's back is pointing down to the northwest. And so that tells us that the direction that this fault slipped in was the top block moved off to the northwest. And that top block is basically what we're standing on here. Most faults that do that sort of up and down motion, most normal faults would have a relatively steep dip, something like 60 degrees or something like that. In this case, it's a much shallower angle, which puzzles a bunch of people, because for various physical reasons, basically, the shallower an angle of the fault is, the more gravity is pushing down on it and causing there to be more friction, and the less gravity is pushing along the direction that the rock's actually trying to slip. And so it's, for reasons of physics, it's relatively difficult to have a low angle fault that actually slips. The classic wisdom is that the friction should be too great for a fault that's this shallow, that the top block shouldn't be able to just slide down off of it. And so people actually argue a little bit whether or not this fault surface, the low angle, is actually still active today as part of the Death Valley fault system, or if the current faults that are lifting up the Black Mountains are actually steep high angle faults that cut across the base of this. Yeah, probably until there's a really good earthquake on this fault, that will be an unresolved question. And so the whole east side of Death Valley is marked by this big normal fault system. And so remember I said that the Death Valley fault was a strike slip fault. It was right lateral, so it's moving, everything on this side is moving to the north, everything on this side is moving south relative to it. And so basically, if you think about the kinematics or the motion of this fault, if the block on top is attached to our side and it's moving off to the north, that fits that picture. And so, the real reason why Death Valley is the lowest elevation in the Northern Hemisphere is because it's actively dropping downwards because of this active fault system. And because it's very dry here, the Amargosa River and the other sort of desert washes that feed into this basin just can't fill it up with sediment and mud and stuff like that as quickly as it's falling downwards. Another thing you can see if you look at this, if you squint, you can sort of see some horizontal lines across the surface of it. Some of those are actually shorelines. Death Valley used to be filled with a big lake during the ice ages. There's like 600 feet deep in the deepest part, called Lake Manly. Entered that less known tourist attraction of Death Valley, the Devil's Miniature Golf Course, but it's definitely not helping my speed. Finally stepping out into the sun. Well, that's I'm not sure it's welcome from a time perspective, but it's welcome from a warmth perspective. It's been a long, cold walk. Well, we've gotten a new surface type, which is this salt pan. When I step in it, my feet sink in like an inch and a half in this slightly muddy layer beneath it, but so far it doesn't seem too muddy. Like, I'm not sinking into it to an alarming degree, and it's not having mud ooze up around my boots. And it's actually faster to walk on than the Devil's mini golf course. So, well, we seem to have entered the land of the Devil's frosted mini wheats. I just stick in the Devil's because that seems to be the common description for anything in Death Valley that's somewhat confounding. For those of you who've never had them, frosted mini wheats are like a little shredded wheat like cereal with like a sugar frosting on them. Never my favorite cereal, but I bet it tastes way better than one of these salty mud bricks. Not easy going on this stuff though. It's sort of like doing my boulder dash the whole way. I definitely wouldn't say no to a bowl of frosted mini wheats right now though. I'm down to sort of my last day of food, and well, let's just say I didn't leave any extra rations to account for the fact that I'd be walking almost twice as far as a typical day. So I'm probably going to be a little hungry today. So I think of my remaining food, I have like 2 ounces of my dried fruit left, I have 2 pieces of bread and probably about 2.5 ounces of peanut butter. And I still have to go another like 16 miles or something. But I just realized that we'd walked along far enough that we now had a much better view of the Black Mountains than earlier. The front of the Black Mountains here, you can see they're really straight and very steep. Those are hallmarks, classic hallmarks of having a normal fault along there. So again, that side has gone up, this side has gone down. On the other hand, if you look at the Panamint Range, on this side you don't see any of those things. You know, the alluvium goes way up the valley. The range front is not as straight. They're very tall mountain range, but they're not as abrupt. And so that tells you that Death Valley is what we call a half graben. So there's a fault on this side dropping it down, but there's no fault on that side. So basically the Panamints in the valley are one block that's sort of rotating like this, and then the Black Mountains over there are popping up. And so again, the other way to tell is the difference in the size of the alluvial fans. So on this side we have these little low squat alluvial fans where you know, gravel is being washed out of these canyons. But those are being dropped down into the valley and buried underneath this playa mud here. Whereas on this side, it's not being dropped down, so the alluvium is just piling up in these big, really tall fans, which the scale of those might be a little hard to appreciate. Remember that the high peak up there is Telescope Peak. It's like 11,500 feet. Right here, we're probably a couple hundred feet below sea level. So the total elevation in that range there is probably 3,500 meters if you're in metric. If that's a 3-kilometer high mountain, the alluvial fan itself goes up 1 kilometer vertically. I'm kind of impressed that is really more like the mini version of the Devil's Golf Course. And there's actually these little spiky things here made of rock salt. So, you know, because Death Valley is the lowest spot around, any streams that come into it, like the Amargosa River, that contain salts, there's no place for the salt to go, so it just builds up here. So there's quite a bit of salt here, and salt is water soluble, so when it rains it gets carved into these fantastic little shapes, which are very jagged and hard to walk on, unfortunately. The only good thing I can say about this is that these are shorter than they are in the more famous Devil's Golf Course. New variation of our looks flat but has holes terrain, and now the holes are bigger, so you have to watch where you put your feet. But other than that, it's actually pretty easy walking. Yeah, we're on a new kind of playa now, or a new kind of salt pan. It's very slippery and it's sticking to my boots. I've now arrived at the lowest point of my journey, 280 feet or about 85 meters below sea level. And it's actually also the lowest place in North America, Badwater Basin. I mean, technically the lowest spot is like 3 miles to the east of here, where it's like a couple feet or maybe a meter lower in elevation. But again, if I've read the map correctly, this spot here is actually lower than the tourist area over on Badwater Road on the other side. So I guess it's all uphill from here. So from a distance, I saw these clumps sticking up from the plain, and I was like, great, I'm going to see my first live plants from up close since sunrise. But it appears that all we have are these salt castles. This is a real Devil's Golf Course style material. This is just as spectacular as the real Devil's Golf Course, only that extends more. But I think I might just walk around these. They look a little treacherous to walk on. Although it didn't get on camera due to a filming error, these salt castles did extend more, soon without any easy way around. Faced with the possibility of another 3 or 4 miles of stumbling through jagged salt along the straight line route, I decided to head for the edge of the playa instead. Finally coming up the playa and approaching the first living plants I've seen up close since before dawn. There's only a long stretch of barren playa out that way. Now I just need to sort of find the path of least resistance along towards the playa. I'm sort of hoping once I got to the plants it would be easier right away, but it still seems to have the same sort of nasty surface here. At some point it should transition from playa to lake, hopefully before we get to the road. Not from playa to lake, from playa to alluvium. Well, this is already better than the nasty stuff out there in the with the salt castles. It's softer on the feet. It crunches rather than just standing up like little knives under your boots. Anyway, it looks like I got about 4 more miles to my supply point. I haven't filmed much since I left the playa because honestly it's been pretty boring, but I have this in 4K, so you should be able to see my parents walking towards me in their car. So I'm almost to my supply point. Hello, parents! Okay, well I've been supplied now. Got even got a hot bowl of soup prepared for me on the spot. So thank you guys for coming out and supplying me. Yep. Now my pack is extra heavy. Fortunately, it's help lifting it. And so I'm heading towards that mountain. I thought it was just a mile more I had to go. Apparently it's 1.8 miles according to my GPS. But basically I just need to get up over sea level. Well, finally made it to camp. 30.8 miles, a little bit less than initially estimated because I ended up going up the fan at a steeper angle to get above sea level earlier with less distance. It means I have to walk a little further tomorrow, but I think given that I walked over 30 miles today, I think I can do that. Nice sunrise going on. Moon is still up too. So just thought I'd give you a sneak peek. Quick panorama of the Black Mountains there. Heading this way today. Just a little bit more stuff to pack up here and then I'll be on my way. Well, the sun is getting down to the top of the alluvium here and I'm finally packed up and ready to go. Not my earliest start, but I think that should be fine given I had a long day yesterday. So not quite done with Death Valley yet. Still need to, basically I'm heading for the end of that next ridge. So I'm going to cut over the last toe of and then I'm going to head up into the Panamint Mountains to Blackwater Spring to refill on water. And I'll camp at Blackwater Spring too. Tonight is the plan. Hopefully there's water there. So I'm just barely over sea level here. Most of the next 6 miles or so will actually be below sea level again because I'm going to lose some altitude as I come down off this fan shortly. Unfortunately, I think most of my walking today is going to be on alluvial fans like this that are pretty rocky because that's the way they seem to come in the Panamint mountainside. And I think I actually am going to angle down the alluvial fan to the salt flat, follow the edge where the walking is easiest, and then angle back up. Because I have about 6 miles to that mountain and it's only a mile to the right to the salt flat, and I think I can at least double my speed on the salt flat rather than here. So I think it actually, and the salt flat actually comes pretty close to that pass on that side, so I think it actually makes sense to refract down and back up again for the fastest route. Well, I call it refraction because it's the same thing as Snell's law for optics. The light always travels by the fastest or the slowest path, but that's a different story. Light will travel by the fastest path, and the angles that the light bends off just comes out from the math of, or the trigonometry, I guess, of, you know, what's the shortest path. If you have two media with different speeds of light, what angle could you go through them to take the least time? So this is the same problem. Yep, just a little update here. So now I'm down near the edge of the playa, sort of walking the boundary between where it gets bigger rocks to the left, where it gets more muddy to the right, just trying to toe the line partway in between where it's not too rocky, not too muddy. I'm entering a little mesquite forest of sorts. I have to put forest in air quotes there, but you know, the mesquite are tall enough to be counted as trees. So all of the, I guess the grayer looking rocks back there in the main part of the Panamint Mountains, those are all old sedimentary rocks, both from the Paleozoic and earlier. So maybe, I don't know, 650 million to 300 million years old, something like that. Now these white and red-brown rocks, on the other hand, are relatively young volcanic rocks. I think 9 to 10 million years old for the white and gray ones there. And they're separated by a detachment fault. And so, much like the Black Mountains back there that have a low-angle normal fault that lifted up the mountains relative to the valley, there are also detachment faults in the Panamint Mountains, although the detachment of the Panamint Mountains have been inactive for a longer time, so there are no longer any current you know, mountain faces associated with them. But in this case, the detachment fault basically goes along the left edge of the white rock with a little sort of some orange bits are probably breccia along the detachment fault, I would guess. And you can see that there are two dark colored dikes that are dipping down to the left that end abruptly at that fault. So that's a good sign there's a fault there, that those two dikes are cut by it. The last bit of playa muds here, there's a little arm of the playa I needed to cut across. So I'm probably about 250 feet below sea level right here. Sea level would be just above the corner I'm going to go around up there. And then the spring I'm aiming for is about 3,200 feet above sea level. So I need to gain about 3,450 feet, or like 1.1 kilometers vertically. So it's all uphill from here. It looks like basalt with the little white specks in there are plagioclase crystals. But I think I get to sea level, and you know, not too long from here. Here there's some of the basalt with much larger plagioclase crystals. Look at that. See all those oatmeal, giant oatmeal flakes. Here's my finger for scale. Big bubbles too. On the left are 9 to 10 million year old tuffs and basalts. And on the right, we're going back to hundreds of millions of years ago old sediments. And actually, because the sediments are tilting at a steeper angle than we're walking up, as we walk up the canyon, we're actually going down through the stack of sediments. So we're sort of taking a trip back through geologic time. I think up the sediments up near the top of the stack here are the Ordovician Pogonip group. And then we'll work our way all the way back down into the Precambrian era, before there were any fossils, or before life had evolved to easily fossilizable shapes. Slow going, steep, hot. Just lost our sun. You know, see back out in Death Valley, Furnace Creek. So we're heading up this canyon straight ahead of us. Well, the burrow scat and trails make me hopeful that there's water up here. I mean, it's the trees way up there below that white patch. There are some trees up there. Ooh, that looks like a wicked scramble if that's it. Nice little afterglow there of the sunset. Still pushing my way up. Haven't even gotten to the base yet. Still worried about, and again, hopefully I find a burrow trail. I can probably follow a burrow trail in the dark. At this rate, I'm not going to get significantly far up before it gets dark. Yeah, I believe the Blackwater Spring was used as a summer camp by the Timbisha Shoshone. I think they called it Bast, according to the book I was reading. I guess they might still use it as summer camp. But anyway, my hope is that maybe the burrow trail will actually lead me to a human trail that heads up that way. On the hillside, you won't be able to see it, but you can see the horizon. It's got a switchback too. Haven't seen a lot of burrow tracks with switchbacks, so this probably is the old Timbisha trail actually. Okay, well, I've come up onto the ridge just before the canyon with the spring, and it's now gotten too dark to follow the trail.